Let us begin our journey into the ancient understanding of death. The Egyptians did not see death as we often see it today. For them, death was not an ending, but a transformation, a passage. And to navigate this passage, they believed the soul itself was not one single thing, but many parts working together in harmony. Imagine for a moment that you are not just one being, but a collection of essences, each one serving a different purpose, each one carrying a different aspect of who you are. The first of these was called the Ka. The Ka was your life force, your vital energy. It was the breath that animated you, the spark that made you alive. When the Egyptians spoke of the Ka, they spoke of it as a double, a spiritual twin that was born with you and remained with you even after the body ceased to breathe. The Ka needed sustenance, even in death. This is why offerings were left at tombs. Bread, beer, the essence of food to nourish the essence of life. The Ka, eternal, waiting, needing care. Then there was the Ba. If the Ka was life force, the Ba was personality. Everything that made you, your quirks, your memories, your character, the way you laughed, the way you thought. The Egyptians depicted the Ba as a bird with a human head, a bird that could fly, that could move freely between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Picture this bird with your face, your eyes flying through the darkness. The Ba could visit your body, return to your tomb, or soar to the heavens. It was not bound as the body was bound. It was freedom, it was essence, it was the continuation of self. But the Ka and the Ba were not the final form. The ultimate goal, the true transformation, was to become Ak. The Ak was the transfigured spirit, the perfected being. When the Ka and Ba united properly in death, when all the rituals were performed correctly, the deceased became Ak, a shining one, an effective spirit. The word Ak is related to light, to illumination. The Ak was radiant, powerful, transformed, no longer merely human, but something elevated, something divine. This Ak, this luminous spirit, had abilities the living did not possess. The Ak could appear in dreams, visiting loved ones with messages, with comfort, with guidance. The Ak could manifest as a presence, a ghostly form, shimmering at the edge of perception. The Ak had intellect, awareness, and agency in the realm of the gods. To become Ak was the highest aspiration. It meant you had succeeded. Your journey was complete. You were no longer struggling through the underworld. You were established, effective, eternal. But how did one achieve this transformation? The Egyptians understood that none of this happened by chance. The universe operated according to Ma'at, cosmic order, divine balance. Ma'at was truth, justice, harmony. It was the proper way of things. And death and the afterlife were part of this order. Every funerary ritual, every spell in the Book of the Dead, every careful preparation of the body was designed to maintain Ma'at, to ensure the transformation from person to Ak, to align the deceased with the cosmic pattern, with the way things were meant to be. Without Ma'at, there was chaos, isfet, disorder, and in disorder, the soul could be lost, devoured, scattered. The rituals were not superstition, they were necessary architecture. They built the bridge between death and eternal life. And at the center of all this stood a god, Osiris, the first mummy, the lord of the underworld. Osiris himself had died, murdered by his brother Set, his body dismembered, scattered across Egypt. But Osiris's faithful wife, Isis, gathered the pieces. And through her magic and the skill of Anubis, Osiris was mummified, wrapped, preserved, and resurrected. Osiris became the first divine mummy, the proof that death could be overcome. He ruled now in the Duat, the realm of the dead, seated on his throne, judging those who came before him. And every Egyptian who died hoped to follow his path, to be Osiris themselves. to undergo the same transformation. When a person was mummified, they were treated as Osiris was treated. The same prayers, the same rituals, the same wrappings. They were becoming Osiris, following his model, his template for resurrection. Osiris was not just a god to worship, he was a promise. He was the evidence that transformation was possible. So the Egyptians understood death as a system, a process with steps, ka-bayak, mummification, ritual, ma'at, and through it all, the guiding example of Osiris, who had walked this path first and shown that on the other side of death there was life, eternal, radiant, divine. This was how the Egyptians understood death, not as darkness, but as doorway, not as ending, but as becoming. And so, the transformation begins. The body is prepared, the rituals are performed, and now, the journey starts. When an Egyptian died, they did not immediately arrive in paradise. There was no instant reward. Instead, they enter a place, a realm, the Duat, the underworld, a vast, mysterious twilight world that existed between the land of the living and the final resting place among the gods. The Duat, even the word itself, feels ancient, heavy. It was not simply death, it was a location, a geography of the afterlife. And like any land, it had its features, its landmarks, its dangers. Imagine stepping into darkness. Not the darkness of night in the world you knew, but something deeper, a darkness that exists outside of time. And in this darkness, there are paths, passages, doorways, and beyond each one, something waits. The Duat was not empty. It was filled with gates, guardians, trials that tested the deceased. This was not a simple passage. This was an ordeal, a journey that required knowledge, courage, and preparation. Without the proper spells, without the correct words, a soul could wander, lost for eternity. And what waited in the Duat? What challenges faced the newly dead? The ancient texts describe lakes of fire. Imagine vast pools, glowing red and orange, radiating heat. Flames dancing on liquid surfaces. The deceased had to pass by these lakes, had to navigate around them, or in some cases, through them. Fire, purifying perhaps, but also deadly to the unprepared. There were serpents, hostile, enormous, coiled in the darkness. Serpents with names like Apophis, the great chaos serpent who sought to swallow Ra himself. These creatures were not merely animals, they were forces, embodiments of Isfit, of disorder, of the destruction that waited for those who failed. Some serpents guarded passageways, others attacked. Their venom was spiritual death, dissolution, the complete unmaking of the soul. To encounter such a serpent without protection, without the right spell of defense, was to risk everything. And there were spirits, dangerous ones. Not all who died achieved transformation. Some remained hostile, hungry. These spirits lurked in the Duat, seeking to drain the life force from others, to pull down those who might succeed where they had failed. Jealous, angry, lost. The Duat was imagined in different ways by different generations, but one powerful vision saw it as a series of caverns and halls. 12 divisions, one for each hour of the night. Each division separated by a gate, and at each gate stood a guardian. These guardians were fierce. They had weapons, they had power, and they had names. Secret names, names of power. And here was the key. The deceased had to know these names, how to speak them correctly. Imagine approaching a massive gate in the darkness. You can sense the presence beyond it. Powerful, ancient, and you must speak. I know you. I know your name. You are. And if you speak truly, if you speak the correct name, the gate opens. The guardian permits you to pass. But if you falter, if you cannot remember, if you speak incorrectly, you're turned away, denied, left to wander. This is why the Book of the Dead contained these names, these spells. The deceased needed this knowledge, written on papyrus, inscribed on tomb walls, placed with the body. It was a guidebook, a map, a collection of the secret words that would open the way. Each cavern had its own character, its own challenges. Some were filled with enemies to avoid. Others required offerings or declarations. The deceased moved through this landscape, guided by the spells, protected by the words of power, hoping to emerge on the other side. But there was another journey happening simultaneously, a cosmic journey. Every night, the sun god Ra completed his own voyage through the underworld. As the sun set in the west, Ra descended into the Duat. He entered in his evening form, aged, weakened by the day's journey across the sky. And then, for 12 hours, Ra traveled through the darkness, through the same caverns, past the same dangers. The great serpent Apophis would attack him, attempting to swallow the sun, to end the cycle forever. But Ra was protected, defended by other gods, and each night he survived. He moved forward. And at dawn, Ra emerged in the east, reborn, young again, rising as the scarab beetle Khepri, rolling the sun disk before him. A new day, life continuing, the cycle maintained. This nightly journey of Ra was more than a story. It was a model, a template. The deceased hoped, aspired, to join Ra's entourage, to become one of the blessed dead who traveled in his solar bark, his divine boat, through the underworld, to be part of his company, protected by his light, moving with him through the dangers. And if they succeeded, if they completed their own trials, if they passed through the gates, if they joined Ra's journey, then they too would be reborn. Each morning, with the rising sun, emerging from darkness into light, death transformed into eternal renewal. This was the promise, the hope, not a static afterlife, but a journey, movement, the deceased traveling with the god, through the underworld, facing chaos, and emerging victorious. Again and again, forever. The journey after death was just beginning. The Duat stretched before them. Dark, dangerous, but not impossible. With the right knowledge, with the right preparations, with the spells from the Book of the Dead, a soul could navigate this realm, could pass the gates, could speak the names, could join the gods' procession, and move ever forward toward the light. Before the journey could truly begin, the body had to be prepared. This was sacred work, essential work, for the Egyptians understood that even as the soul transformed, even as the BA flew and the cop resisted, the body itself remained important. Mummification, the word carries weight, mystery, but for the ancient Egyptians, it was practical, necessary. The body was not merely a shell to be discarded. It was a home, an anchor, a dwelling place for the spiritual components, especially the Ka, that life force that needed somewhere to return, somewhere to rest. Without the body, preserved and protected, the Ka would have no home. It would drift, lost, unable to receive the offerings left at the tomb, unable to reunite with the BA. The body, even in death, served a purpose. It had to endure. It had to last for eternity. And so, the embalmers began their work. These were skilled craftsmen, priests. They knew the prayers. They knew the procedures. Step by step, with reverence, with precision, they transformed the deceased. First, the brain. The embalmers would insert a long hook, carefully through the nostril, up into the skull, and then, slowly, they would extract the brain, piece by piece, through the nose, a delicate process, painstaking. And once removed, the brain was discarded, cast aside, because the Egyptians did not believe, as we do now, that the brain was the center of thought. To them, the brain was merely filling, unnecessary, the true seat of intelligence, of emotion, of memory, was elsewhere. The heart was everything. When an Egyptian spoke of thinking, they spoke of the heart. When they spoke of feeling, of knowing, of understanding, they meant the heart. The heart was consciousness itself. The heart was the person. So while the brain was removed and discarded, the heart remained. Sacred, protected. It would be needed later, for the judgment. But other organs also had to be addressed. The lungs, the liver, the stomach, the intestines. These would decay, would cause the body to deteriorate from within. So they too were carefully removed, through an incision in the left side of the abdomen, extracted with care. These organs were not discarded. They were important. They were preserved separately, washed, treated, and placed in special containers. Canopic jars, 4 jars, each one protected by one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imsidi, with his human head, guarded the liver. Hapi, with the head of a baboon, protected the lungs. Dumutef, the jackal-headed, watched over the stomach. And Kabasanof, with the head of a falcon, kept safe the intestines. 4 sons, for guardians, 4 jars standing beside the sarcophagus, keeping watch. The organs preserved, protected by divine beings, ready to be reunited with the deceased in the afterlife. But the heart, as we have said, remained. After the chest cavity was emptied, the heart was cleaned, purified, wrapped carefully in linen, and then returned to its place within the body, nestled back into the chest. Because without the heart, there could be no judgment, no weighing, no continuation of the journey. The heart had to be there, intact, whole. It would be needed when the deceased stood before Osiris. Once the organs were addressed, the body itself needed preservation. And for this, the embalmers used natron, a naturally occurring salt, a mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and sodium chloride. Natron drew out moisture, desiccated, dried. The body was covered in natron, packed with it, inside and out. And then the waiting began. For about 70 days, the body rested in this salt. Slowly, gradually, the moisture left. The tissues dried. The flesh became preserved, stable, unchanging. 70 days. The same number of days that the star Sirius disappeared from the night sky before rising again. A period of transformation, of hidden work, of preparation. After the 70 days, the body was removed from the natron, carefully cleaned, and then the anointing began. Precious oils, fragrant resins, cedar oil, myrrh, frankincense. These were rubbed into the skin, massaged into the dried flesh, not just for preservation, but for honor, for sanctification. The scent of divinity, the smell of the sacred, the body becoming more than it was, becoming holy. Then came the wrapping, linen strips, miles of them sometimes, wound around each finger, each toe, each limb. The embalmers worked methodically, wrapping, tucking, securing. Between the layers, they placed amulets, scarabs, protective symbols, each one inscribed with spells, each one offering defense. The wrapping continued, layer upon layer, the body gradually disappearing beneath the linen, becoming the mummy, the image of Osiris, the shape recognized by the gods. And sometimes, for the wealthy, for the elite, the final touch was gold. Golden resin coating the outer layers, gilding the mask that would cover the face. The deceased transformed into a divine image, shining, radiant, eternal. But this level of care, this elaborate preservation, was not available to everyone. Egypt was a society of different classes, different means, and so there were tiers, different levels of mummification depending on what one could afford. For those of lesser wealth, the process was simpler. The embalmers might inject cedar oil into the body through the anus. This oil, caustic and powerful, would dissolve the internal organs from within. Then, the body would be placed in natron, and when the time came, the liquefied organs would drain away. No incision needed, No canopic jars required. A more economical method, but still effective. And for those with even less, the most basic burial. Perhaps just a purging of the intestines, a cleansing, and then directly into the natron. Minimal intervention, minimal cost, but still an attempt at preservation, still a hope for eternity. Even the poorest Egyptian, if they could manage it, sought to preserve their body, because without it, the journey was so much harder. Without it, the Ka had no home. The transformation might not complete. So the body was prepared, by whatever means available, with whatever resources could be gathered. Because this was not vanity. This was not luxury. This was necessity. This was the foundation upon which everything else will be built. The body preserved, the organs protected, the heart in its place. The deceased now ready to face what came next. The body is prepared, the wrapping is complete, and now it is time for the final journey in the world of the living, time for the funeral. Picture a procession, moving slowly across the sand, the sun overhead, the heat shimmering, and at the center, a sledge, a wooden platform, dragged by oxen or by men. And on this sledge rests the coffin, the mummy within, surrounded by mourners. The family walks alongside, professional mourners too, wailing, throwing dust on their heads. The sound of grief carrying across the desert. This is a public moment, a communal moment. The deceased is being accompanied, one final time, through the land of the living toward their eternal home. The procession moves toward the tomb, slowly, deliberately. This is not rushed. This is ceremony. Each step meaningful, each moment sacred. And behind the sledge come servants carrying offerings, food, wine, furniture, everything the deceased will need. Finally, they arrive. The tomb entrance, carved into rock or built from stone. The threshold between worlds. And here, at this doorway, the most important ritual begins. The opening of the mouth, a ceremony so vital, so essential, that without it, the mummy would remain incomplete, sealed, unable to function in the afterlife. The priests gather. They wear their ritual masks. One, dressed as Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. They bring special tools, an adze, a Peshesh Kef blade, instruments of power, and with these tools, with sacred words, they touch the mummy's mouth, its eyes, its ears, its nose. Each touch reactivating, opening the mouth so the deceased can speak the spells, can declare their innocence, can eat the offerings, the eyes so they can see the path ahead, see the gods, navigate the darkness, the ears to hear the words of judgment, the nose to breathe again, not the breath of the living, but the breath of eternity. Without this ceremony, the deceased would be trapped, silent, blind, helpless. But with it, they are reawakened, made functional, given back the senses they would need for everything that waited ahead. And then the placement begins. The tomb is not empty. It is furnished, filled with everything one might need. Food and drink, bread, beer, wine, meat, placed in jars and bowls, arranged carefully because the Ka would need sustenance, would need these offerings for eternity. Clothing, linen garments, folded neatly, sandals, because one must be dressed properly, even in death. Furniture, beds, chairs, headrests, a place to rest, a place to sit. The comforts of home, recreated in stone and wood. Jewelry, amulets, bracelets, and rings, not merely for adornment, but for protection. Each piece inscribed, empowered. Cosmetics too, kohl for the eyes, oils for the skin, beauty and care, continuing beyond death. Of course, not everyone could afford such abundance. The wealthy, the elite, they had elaborate tombs, great structures, pyramids rising toward the sky, or rock-cut chambers deep in the Valley of the Kings. Room after room, corridor after corridor, filled with treasures, with art, with everything needed for an eternal life of comfort and status. But the poorer Egyptians, they had simpler graves. A pit in the sand, perhaps. A few pottery jars. Some bread. A simple coffin, or just a wrapping of linen. They did what they could. They provided what they could afford. The principle was the same, even if the execution was more modest. Everyone, rich or poor, tried to include Ushabtis. These were small figurines, mummy-shaped, made of wood, or faience or stone, and they had a purpose, a very specific purpose. In the afterlife, there would be work, fields to plow, irrigation ditches to maintain. The gods might call upon the deceased to perform labor, and so the Ushabtis were there to answer instead. "I will do it," they would say, magical servants, standing ready, taking on the burden so the deceased could rest. Some tombs contained hundreds of Ushabtis, one for each day of the year, an overseer Ushabtis to direct them, a whole workforce, miniature but effective, ready to serve. The tomb itself was more than just a burial place. It was a dwelling. The Egyptians called these tombs houses of eternity, because that is what they were, permanent homes, places where the deceased would reside forever. For the elite, these houses had special features, offering chapels, above-ground chambers where family members could come, could perform rituals, could leave food and drink, could speak prayers. These chapels kept the connection alive, the living tending to the dead receiving sustenance, the relationship continuing. And built into the wall of these chapels often was a false door, a carved doorway, painted, detailed, but leading nowhere in the physical sense. This was a magical portal, a threshold that only the Ka could pass through. The Ka, residing in the tomb below, could travel up through this false door, could receive the offerings left in the chapel, could interact in its own way with the world of the living, and then could pass back through, back to the tomb, back to rest. The false door, a boundary that was not a boundary, a separation that allowed connection. The walls of the tomb were never left blank. Artists covered them with scenes, images of daily life, the deceased in their fields, overseeing harvest, hunting in the marshes, feasting with family, engaging in all the activities they enjoyed when they were alive. But these were not mere decorations, not simple memories. These paintings, these carvings had power, magic. By depicting these scenes, the Egyptians believed they made them real, made them continue. The deceased could magically participate in these activities forever. The harvest would always be successful. The feast would always be abundant. Life continuing in painted form. And there were boats, model boats, placed in the tomb, sometimes elaborate, with sails and oars and crew, sometimes simple, but always intentional. These boats served a purpose. In life, Egyptians traveled the Nile. It was their highway, their connection. And in death, there was another Nile, a celestial river, flowing through the Duat, through the sky. The deceased would need to travel, to journey with Ra, to navigate the waterways of the afterlife. The model boat would become real, full-sized, magical, ready to carry the deceased wherever they needed to go, across the waters of the underworld, through the night sky, following the gods, moving, always moving through eternity. And so the tomb was complete, the house of eternity prepared, furnished, empowered, the false door installed, the offerings arranged, the Ushabtis standing ready, the boats waiting, the walls alive with scenes of life. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. The deceased, now truly at rest, in their eternal home, but also prepared to wake, to rise, to journey, to transform. The tomb was not an ending. It was a beginning, a foundation. From here, the real journey would unfold. The body has been preserved, the tomb prepared, but there were more layers still, more protections, more transformations. The deceased needed to be wrapped, not just in linen, but in magic itself. In the earliest times, coffins were simple, rectangular boxes, plain, functional, a container to hold the body, nothing more. But over time, something shifted. The Egyptians began to see the coffin differently, not just as a box, but as part of the transformation itself. They began to shape coffins to look like people, anthropoid coffins, human-formed, with a face carved or painted on the lid, a serene expression, eyes open, gazing at eternity, arms crossed over the chest, in the position of Osiris. Because that is what the deceased was becoming. Osiris, the god who died and rose again. By placing the body in a coffin shaped like Osiris, shaped like a divine being, the deceased took on that identity, became, through sympathetic magic, what they resembled. The coffin was not just protection. It was transformation, a cocoon, and from it, the deceased would emerge, changed, divine. For those of high status, for the wealthy and powerful, one coffin was not enough. They used nested coffins, one inside another, each one more elaborate than the last, each one another layer of protection, another barrier between the body and the chaos outside. The innermost coffin, often gilded, golden, radiant, fitted closely to the mummy, then a second coffin around that, perhaps painted with scenes of gods and spells, and then a third, and finally, all of these placed within a stone sarcophagus, massive, heavy, carved from granite or limestone, sealed. Layer upon layer, protection upon protection, the body at the center, guarded, safe, held in multiple embraces of stone and wood and gold. But the coffins alone were not sufficient. The wrapping, the linen itself, held its own significance, its own power. The linen used for wrapping was often, interestingly, not new. It was household cloth, used, perhaps sheets from the deceased's own bed, clothing they had worn, fabric that had been part of their daily life. But before it could touch the sacred body, it had to be purified, washed, blessed, transformed from a mundane into the holy. The wrapping ceremony was not done carelessly. It was ritual, performed by priests, with prayers spoken over every layer, specific incantations for the fingers, for the arms, for the legs, for the head, each part of the body, wrapped individually, named, blessed. And as the wrapping progressed, as the linen wound around and around, amulets were placed, small objects, carved, inscribed, each one positioned precisely, at the throat, over the heart, on the chest, at the wrists. These amulets were not decorative. They were functional, necessary. Each one offered protection against a specific danger. Each one provided a particular kind of power. The scarab was perhaps the most important. Carved from green stone, green glazed faience, the color of life, of growing things, of renewal. The scarab beetle, which rolled balls of dung across the sand, was associated with Khepri, the rising sun, the self-created god, the one who brought himself into being each morning. A scarab placed over the heart ensured rebirth, ensured that the deceased, like the sun, would rise again, would transform, would push forward into new life. Some scarabs were inscribed on the flat underside with spells from the Book of the Dead. Chapter 30, the Heart Scarab Spell, words that would keep the heart from testifying against its owner during judgment. These scarabs could be worn in life, around the neck, on a finger, carried close, and then, at death, placed with the body, a companion in both worlds. There were other amulets. The Jed Pillar, a tall column, associated with Osiris's backbone, symbol of stability, of endurance, placed on the body to give the deceased the strength of Osiris, the ability to stand, to rise, to remain upright against all forces. the Eye of Horus, the Wedjat, a powerful symbol, the Eye of the Falcon God, torn out in battle, but restored, made whole. It represented healing, completeness, protection. Placed on the body, it watched, it guarded, it kept evil at bay. Different amulets for different purposes. The Tayat, the knot of Isis, for her magical protection. The headrest amulet, to lift the head, to prevent it from being separated from a body. The two-finger amulet, representing the fingers of the embalmer, helping the deceased climb the ladder to heaven. Each amulet, carefully chosen, carefully placed, building a network of magical defense around the body. But there was more. Between the layers of linen, the priest tucked something else. Papyrus, written spells, text from the Book of the Dead, short prayers, protective formulas. These written words, folded small, pressed against the body between the wrappings. And in doing this, they transformed the mummy into something extraordinary. The body itself became a living spell, a text. Every layer of linen, every amulet, every written word working together, creating a magical being. The body was no longer just flesh. It was power. It was protection. It was transformation made solid. The deceased, wrapped in these layers, was wrapped in power, in divine words, in the names of gods, in symbols of rebirth and protection. They literally wore their defense, their hope, their transformation. And all of this, the coffins, the wrappings, the amulets, the spells, all of it was preparation, making the deceased ready, strong enough, protected enough, to face what came next, to withstand the trials, to navigate the dangers, to reach, ultimately, the Hall of Judgment. They were being armored, not with metal, but with magic, not with weapons, but with words. Every layer, another piece of the puzzle. Every amulet, another tool. Every spell, another shield. The body, once vulnerable, now fortified. Once mortal, now divine. Once simply dead, now transformed into something that could journey through the underworld and survive. The wrapping complete, the amulets in place, the spells secured between the layers, the coffins nested and sealed, the mum ready, protected, empowered, a being of magic, a being of transformation, a being prepared for eternity. We have spoken of preparations, of the body, of the tomb, of wrappings and amulets, but there was one more essential tool, one more source of power, the guide, the map, the collection of words that would light the way through darkness. The Book of the Dead. Though we call it a book, it was never truly one book, not a single text, not a fixed volume that every Egyptian received. No, the Book of the Dead was fluid, personal, a collection of spells and prayers, carefully chosen, carefully copied, for each individual who could afford it. Think of it as a library, a vast library of magical knowledge. And from this library, scribes would select. Chapter 6 perhaps, Chapter 125 certainly, Chapter 30 for the heart scarab. Some would choose 50 spells, others 200, depending on need, on resources, on which dangers they most feared, on which transformations they most desired. Each copy of the Book of the Dead was unique, customized, like a traveler packing for a journey, taking only what they thought they would need. Some spells were common, appearing in nearly every copy. Others were rare, specialized, personal. The words themselves held power, not just meaning, but force, magic. To write the spell was to activate it. To speak it was to make it real. Even abbreviated versions, shortened forms, retained their full potency, because the gods could read intention, could understand the essence, even when the details were compressed. A single hieroglyph might stand for an entire phrase. A brief formula might contain the power of a longer prayer. Efficiency was possible in magic, if the knowledge was there, if the scribe knew what they were doing. And where were these spells written? On papyrus, yes. Long scrolls of papyrus, sometimes stretching meters in length, rolled up, placed in the tomb, or held in the hands of the deceased. The portable guidebook, the reference text for the journey ahead. But also on coffins, the inner surfaces painted with columns of hieroglyphs, spells surrounding the body, protecting it from all sides. Some coffins were entirely covered, every available surface inscribed. The deceased lying in a container made of words, made of power. On tomb walls, carved into the stone, or painted on plaster, monumental spells, permanent, unable to be lost or damaged. The walls themselves speaking, offering guidance, offering protection. On the linen wrappings we have mentioned, small strips of papyrus, tucked between layers, the spells close to the skin, intimate, personal, becoming part of the mummy itself. And on amulets, tiny hieroglyphs etched into scarabs, into gold, into stone, portable magic, worn, carried, always present. The spells were everywhere, redundant, overlapping, reinforcing each other, because this was too important a risk. One copy might be damaged, one text might fade, but with multiple versions, in multiple locations, the knowledge would survive. The power would remain. At the heart of many spells was a simple principle. Names held power. To know the true name of something was to have control over it. Authority, the ability to command. The gods had names, secret names, names they did not share freely. But the spells contained these names, revealed them, gave them to the deceased. And with these names, the deceased could address the gods directly, could invoke them, could request their aid, or even command it. The demons of the underworld, the hostile spirits, they too had names. And if you knew their name, you could banish them, could tell them to stand aside, could neutralize their threat. I know you. You are broken of nose. You are he who eats filth. I know your name, and you have no power over me. The gates themselves, each one named, and the guardians at those gates also named. To pass through, you had to speak these names, had to prove your knowledge. The spells contained these names, taught them, prepared the deceased for the interrogation that would come. Who are you? The guardian would demand, and the deceased would answer with confidence, with certainty. I am the Great One, son of the Great One. I am fire, son of fire. I know your name, guardian. You are he who lives on worms. Stand aside. And the gate would open. Some scrolls of the Book of the Dead were created with extraordinary care, extraordinary precision. The scribes would measure them against the body itself, the corpse, laying the papyrus alongside, marking where the head was, where the heart, where the feet. And then they would place the spells accordingly. Heart spells positioned at heart level, spells for the feet at the feet. The scroll aligned with the anatomy, so that when it was placed in the coffin, the magic would correspond directly. Heart spell touching heart, foot spell touching feet. Sympathetic magic, correspondence, everything connected, nothing random. In the earlier periods, these spells were sometimes painted directly on the coffin walls. The coffin texts, they were called, comprehensive, detailed, the coffin itself serving as the book. But this created limitations. The shape of the coffin determined how much text could fit. Then, in the New Kingdom, coffin design changed. They became more curved, more form-fitting, anthropoid, beautiful, but with less flat surface area, less room for extensive text. And so, a shift occurred. The spells moved to separate papyrus scrolls, complete copies, unabbreviated. The Book of the Dead, as we often think of it, a scroll that could be as long as needed, as detailed as desired, not constrained by the shape of coffin, free to contain everything. These scrolls became works of art, illustrated, the spells accompanied by vignettes, small scenes showing the deceased performing the ritual, standing before the gods, traversing the lake of fire, the words and the images working together, both necessary, both powerful. To read the Book of the Dead was to be prepared, to possess it was to possess the keys to the afterlife. Every lock could be opened. Every question could be answered. Every danger could be faced. It was education. It was armor. It was power, written down, made permanent, made accessible. The knowledge of priests, the wisdom of generations, distilled into spells and formulas and secret names. And with this book, this customized, personal, powerful collection of spells, the deceased was ready. Ready to speak, ready to act, ready to navigate the trials ahead. Not helpless, not ignorant, but prepared, knowledgeable, empowered. The Book of the Dead was their guide, their companion, their voice when their own voice might fail. The words were there, the names were known, the path revealed. The journey through the do-it, the gates passed, the guardian satisfied, the spells spoken, and now the deceased arrives at the most crucial moment, the moment of judgment. The Hall of Ma'at, a vast chamber, imposing, sacred. Here, in this hall, the truth would be revealed. Here, the deceased would face their final test. Not a battle, not a riddle, but something more profound, more absolute. The weighing of the heart. At the center of the hall stands a scale, a great balance. On one side, a feather, light, white, the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth, of justice, of cosmic order. It weighs almost nothing. It weighs everything. And on the other side, the heart of the deceased, removed from the chest, placed carefully on the scale. The heart that thought, that felt, that remembered, that carried every action, every intention, every truth, and every lie. The heart would be weighed, measured against perfection, against the feather, and what the scale revealed would determine everything. But the deceased was not without help, not without protection. Remember the heart scarab, that greenstone beetle we spoke of earlier, placed over the heart during mummification, inscribed with a spell. Chapter 30 of the Book of the Dead. This spell, this crucial formula, was a plea, a command, addressed to the heart itself. O my heart of my mother, O my heart of my being, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. The heart might remember things, mistakes, failures, moments of weakness, and in the presence of the gods, in the hall of truth, the heart might speak, might testify, might betray its owner. The spell was insurance, a magical binding, compelling the heart to remain silent, to remain favorable, to behave. Many heart scarabs carried this spell, carved on the flat underside, words pressed against the heart, reminding it, controlling it. The deceased could not risk their own heart becoming their accuser. And if the original heart had been lost, damaged during mummification, missing for any reason, the scarab itself could serve, could symbolically replace the heart, could be weighed in its stead. The magic was strong enough. The representation was sufficient. The scarab became the heart. The weighing begins. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, tends a scale, adjusts it, ensures it is balanced, ensures it is true. He is the guardian of this moment, the one who cannot be deceived. His hands steady, his judgment pure. Thoth stands nearby, ibis-headed god of wisdom, of writing. He holds his palette, his reed pen, ready to record, ready to write down what the scale reveals. The cosmic scribe, the witness of truth. And there, seated on his throne, is Osiris, the lord of the underworld, the first mummy, the judge, flanked by other gods, Isis and Nephthys, the 42 judges of the dead, all watching, all waiting. The heart is placed, the feather rests opposite, and the scale moves, settles. Everyone watches. The moment extends. Time seems to pause. But before the final judgment, there is another test, the negative confession. The deceased must speak, must address each of the 42 judges, one by one, and to each must make a declaration, a claim of innocence. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not caused pain. I have not polluted the water. I have not been angry without cause. I have not committed adultery. I have not been greedy. On and on. 42 declarations. 42 sins not committed. This was the negative confession, not stating what you did, but declaring what you did not do. A litany of innocence, of purity, of a life lived in accordance with Ma'at. Each judge had a name, had a specific transgression they judged, and the deceased had to know these names, had to address each judge correctly. O White of Stride, who comes from Heliopolis, I have not committed evil. O Flame Embracer, who comes from Karaha, I have not robbed. The names, always the names. The power was in knowing, in speaking correctly, in demonstrating knowledge. The Book of the Dead contained these names, these declarations. The deceased had studied, had prepared, had memorized. And then, the scale delivers its verdict. The heart and the feather. Are they equal? Does the heart balance? Is it light, as light is truth? If yes, if the scale is balanced, then the declaration is made. The deceased is proclaimed Masai Keru, true of voice, justified, vindicated. Their words have proven true. Their heart has proven pure. They have passed. Thoth records this, writes it down, makes it official. Osiris nods, approves. The deceased is welcomed. They may enter paradise, the field of reeds. They may live among the gods. They may travel with Ra. They have succeeded. They are transformed. They are eternal. But if the heart is heavy, if it sinks, if it outweighs the feather, then the truth is revealed. This person lived in Isfit, in chaos, in wrongdoing. The heart is burdened with guilt, with sin, with lies. And there, waiting, is Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, the devourer, the eater of the dead. She crouches beside the scale, patient, hungry, her mouth open. If the heart is too heavy, it is given to Amit. She devours it, consumes it completely, and with it, the person ceases to exist. Not just dead, but unmade. No afterlife, no paradise, no rebirth, nothing. The second death, final, absolute, obliteration. This was the ultimate fear, not pain, not torment, but non-existence, being erased, being forgotten, being nothing. All the preparations, all the spells, all the rituals, all for this moment, to avoid this fate. The Hall of Ma'at, the weighing, the confession, the feather, the scale, everything balanced on this moment, everything dependent on truth, on Ma'at, on the life lived before death. For those who pass, joy, relief, transformation complete. For those who fail, nothing, only the darkness, only Amit, only the end. The judgment delivered, the verdict final, the fate of the soul decided, here in the Hall of Ma'at, where truth weighs everything. The judgment has been passed, the heart has balanced, the deceased has been declared Masai Keru, true of voice. But the journey is not complete. There are still protections to maintain, still connections to preserve, still an eternal life to live. Even before the judgment, protections were put in place. Around the tomb, around the burial chamber itself, at the four cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, magical bricks were placed, buried in the walls, hidden, but present, always present. These were not ordinary bricks. They were made of mud, inscribed with spells, and some contained more, small figures pressed into the mud, representations of protective deities, written instructions for what these guardians should do. Keep watch. Allow no enemy to enter. Protect this place. The four directions, the four corners of the world, all guarded, the deceased surrounded by an invisible barrier, a fence of magic, keeping hostile forces out, keeping the sacred space safe. These bricks remained, long after the funeral, long after the tomb was sealed, working constantly, vigilant, the first line of defense, the foundation of protection, placed with care, activated with words, eternal sentinels. And now, with the successful judgment, the deceased has achieved their goal. They have become Ak, the transformed spirit, the luminous one, no longer struggling, no longer seeking. They have arrived. They are established. They are effective. But where exactly have they arrived? What is the destination of the blessed dead? Aru, the field of reeds. Paradise. Imagine endless fields, green, growing, wheat and barley swaying in gentle breezes, canals of pure water, islands of peace, the air filled with the scent of lotus, the sky forever blue. This was the ideal destination, the place where the blessed dwelt, a mirror of Egypt, but perfected, more fertile, more abundant, no drought, no famine, no hardship, only harvest, only plenty, only peace. In the field of reeds, the deceased would have their own plot of land. They would work it, though without the exhaustion of earthly labor. They would reap, though the harvest was always successful. They would feast. They would rest. They would live as they had lived in Egypt, but better, perfect, eternal. And they were not alone. The gods were present, family members who had passed before, friends, companions, all together, all at peace, the community of the blessed, the eternal society. But even in paradise, even as an Ak, the connection to the living world remained important, because the deceased still needed the offerings, still needed the rituals, still needed to be remembered. The living had a duty, a sacred obligation, to maintain the tomb, to visit, to bring food and drink, to pour libations, to speak the names of the dead, to keep them alive in memory, in practice, in ritual. Families would come, especially on festival days. They would bring bread and beer, meat and wine. They would place these offerings on the altar, in the chapel, before the false door, and the ka of the deceased would receive the spiritual essence, will be nourished, will be satisfied. This was love. This was duty. This was the bond between the living and the dead, unbroken, continuing, the family extended across the boundary of death. But what if the family failed? What if generations passed and no one came anymore? What if the tomb was forgotten? The offerings ceased? The Egyptians planned for this. Inside the tomb, carved on the walls or written on papyrus, were offering lists. Long lists: bread, beer, oxen, fowl, linen, incense, alabaster, everything needed, everything desired. These lists were magical. By writing them down, by depicting them, the Egyptians made them real, made them eternal. Even if no actual offerings were brought, the listed offerings would still exist, would still be received. The ka could feed on the written word, on the carved image, forever. The list was insurance, was guarantee. As long as the writing remained, the offerings remained. Endless, eternal. The deceased would not hunger, would not thirst, would not be forgotten. And the rituals themselves, when they were performed, were powerful moments. The priests who conducted them did not act as themselves. They became the gods. They wore masks, the mask of Anubis, the jackal head, tall, black, sacred. When a priest put on this mask, he was no longer a man. He was Anubis. He performed the opening of the mouth as Anubis would. He tended the body as Anubis would. The mask transformed him, made him effective, made him divine. This was ritual theater, but it was more than performance. It was transformation. It was making the mythical real, making the divine present. Some families, wealthy families, wanted to ensure these rituals continued forever, and so they made arrangements. They endowed priests with land, gave them fields, gave them income, in exchange for a promise, a contract to perform the funeral rites, to maintain the offerings, generation after generation. The land would pass from father to son. The priestly duty would pass as well. The rituals would continue. The deceased would be tended, not just for years, but for centuries, as long as the arrangement held, as long as the land produced, as long as memory remained. During these rituals, incense was burned, frankincense, myrrh, the smoke rising, curling, filling the chapel with fragrance. This smoke carried prayers, carried offerings, carried the devotion of the living up to the realm of the gods, up to the deceased. And oils were poured, precious oils, cedar oil, lily oil, these anointed, purified, made sacred. The scent alone was divine presence, was holiness, was a transformation of the ordinary into the sacred. Of course, not every Egyptian could afford the elaborate tombs, the endowed priests, the masses of offerings, but even ordinary people, even those of modest means, could participate, could prepare for the afterlife. Of course, not every Egyptian could afford the elaborate tombs, the endowed priests, the masses of offerings, but even ordinary people, even those of modest means, could participate, could prepare for the afterlife. There was a market, vendors, artisans, who produced funerary goods, mass-produced, affordable, coffins of standard design, ashaptis by the dozen, amulets, scarabs, simple copies of the Book of the Dead, pre-made, ready to purchase. These items might not be personalized, might not be elaborate, but they worked. They held the same magic, the same power, the same protection. A poor farmer could buy a scarab, could be mummified, even if simply, could have a copy of essential spells, could hope for the same transformation as the pharaoh. The afterlife was not only for the elite, it was for everyone, everyone who prepared, everyone who tried. The magic was democratic, available, real. And when all was done, when judgment was passed, when the deceased was established in the field of reeds, when the offerings were secured, then came the reward, the full realization of transformation. The successful deceased, the Ak, had freedom, complete freedom. They could move between worlds. They could dwell in paradise. They could travel through the Duat. They could visit the world of the living. They could appear in dreams. They could journey with the gods. They were not trapped, not limited, not bound. They were effective spirits, mobile, powerful, aware. They could go where they wished, do what they wished, exist in multiple realms simultaneously. They could join Ra's bark, travel through the night sky, face Apophis, see the sun reborn, again and again, participating in the cosmic cycle, part of the divine order. They could return to their tomb, receive offerings, communicate in subtle ways with their family, offer guidance, offer protection, present but unseen, watching over those they loved. They could feast in Aru, rest in the shade, work their fields, live in peace, in perfection, in the eternal now of paradise. All options available, all realms accessible, the boundaries dissolved, the limitations removed. This was the promise fulfilled. This was transformation complete. This was eternal life, not static, not limited, but vast, free, infinite. The journey that began with death ended with life, true life, eternal life, life among the gods, life in paradise, life continuing forever. And so the ancient Egyptians understood. Death was not the end. It was a doorway, a passage, a transformation, from mortal to divine, from limited to limitless, from temporary to eternal. All the preparations, all the rituals, all the spells, all the protections, all of it for this, for the moment when the deceased became Ak, became free, became eternal. This was the hope. This was the belief. This was the Egyptian understanding of life after death. Rest now. Let these ancient words, these ancient hopes, these ancient truths drift through your mind, like the BA drifting between worlds, like the bark of RA crossing the night sky, like the soul finding its way to peace. Sleep well.